Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We are continuing our study into the 190 list of Scrivener. And so Scrivener, he did his own Textus Receptus edition. And what he did was he showed where there are 190 places where he believed that he had to amend the Greek text to depart from Theodore Beza's text to create the exact Greek text that the King James translators formulated. And so the King James translators, they used Theodore Beza's 1598 text, but as far as I can tell, about 10% of this 190 list is valid. And so we're going to see this tonight. This is a very good example of why we need to be a bit more skeptical of Scrivener than we are, because a lot of people just think, oh, Scrivener, he worked on a Textus Receptus edition, so he must be a TR guy. He must support the authorized version. To me, Scrivener was quite a deceptive character. He worked with Westcott and Hort. He wanted to omit many verses out of the King James, out of the Textus Receptus. And so when we go through this 190 list, we can see that many of these changes are unnecessary. And as we're going to see with this one, it's actually an error. And so that's what I'm finding more and more, is Scrivener was actually in error a lot of the time. So let's just dive straight into this. So on my website, now if you do a quick Google search and you type in 190 Beza, you'll come to this site. It'll be the first one that comes up. A page where there's a whole bunch of verses. And in a lot of them, I've done, I've put photographs of or screenshots of Scrivener's work, Beza's work, and the King James, because these are the main text that we need to look at, the source text. Sometimes I have filled in the gaps with these editions, but sometimes it's not even really worth doing, because, for me to go through all this, it could take me, 30, 40 minutes to look at all these editions. And by the time I've looked it up, I may as well take a screenshot of it and put it on the page. And so there's it sort of bogs me down doing all that. But sometimes the answer is very easy and very clear to see. So I haven't even done any of the English editions yet, but we'll go to the interlinear text and we'll look at that on Keith Mason's Textus Receptus site. So what is the issue here? So let's have a look at what Scrivener says first off. So this is what I'll do is I'll go to the very top of the page. So this is the 190 variations in Scrivener's 1881 Greek New Testament from Beza's 1598 Textus Receptus. So if we go to page 1 here, we see in his appendix, so he looked at the Complutensian, Erasmus, Aldus, Collinnaeus, Stephanus's 4 editions, so also Erasmus's 5 editions. The Plantin Polyglot, Beza's 5 editions. He actually has 1560 there. I'm not sure why. It should be 1556 there. But anyway, maybe he has some reason why. But he has the Latin Vulgate, Tyndale, and the Authorized Version. So these are just the abridgments. So we've gone through in our previous 16 videos, we've gone through Matthew 1, 8 and 9, Matthew 2, 11, or Matthew 1:23 there, Matthew 2, 17, 3. So now we're up to Mark chapter 9, verse 38. And so you can see what's written here. And I just wanted to show you that that is exactly what I have here. Okay, as you can see. So it's got 9:38. So it has into onomati. So in the name. So it's in the dative there. We can see the iota subscript underneath the omega. So it says here that this is the reading of Erasmus, of Aldus, of Collinnaeus, the Vulgate, and Tyndale. So it says it's omitted, or the ones that omit n is just in, as a preposition, the Complutensian Polyglot, Stephanus, and Beza. And that has per nomen tum bes. So let's just write that down, per nomen tum, let's say pes, I think it did. Oh, sorry, it says bez. So that I thought it said pairs. I'm thinking. I'm just going to translate. Oops, that's not the best way to write translate, but it does come up. It's quite amazing. Love technology by your name. Okay. So he's even written that in there. It's interesting. He's got by, or it says by your name. Per nomen tum, by your name. Okay. And so what is the issue here? So basically, from as far as I can tell, Scrivener is saying that these earlier editions are omitting the N here, the N. So it's omitting that, but these earlier editions, sorry, they have that reading in it, but these latter editions omit it, the Complutensian Polyglot. Well, that would be the earliest edition, actually. But the Stephanus and the Beza, so Erasmus, Aldus, Collinnaeus, Vulgate, and Tyndale, have the N where these others don't. And so the most important one to us is Theodore Beza's 1598. And so what we're going to see here is quite a non-event, because Beza actually does have the reading. And I was going through this just thinking to myself, it's really poor scholarship on behalf of Scrivener. And so, I don't want to always be just defaulting to Scrivener having poor scholarship, but it does look like that. Now let's just have a look at his edition. Okay, so we're at 9. Where are we? 37, 938 here. So let's close that. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Now, I just wanted to show you this because this is the source document. This is this is Frederick Scrivener's Textus Receptus edition that he completed in 1880. It was published in 1881. And this is the exact same Textus Receptus that the Trinitarian Bible Society print, but they don't put things in bold with these numbers or these specific asterisks here. So what those numbers are places where the Westcott and Hort text depart from the Textus Receptus, and these asterisks here are places where Scrivener says there's 191 differences between his text and the text of Theodore Beza. Okay, so if we go down the bottom here, you'll see these numbers match up with the Westcott and Hort text. So that was their main thing. But while he was doing that, he just showed where he amended his text every now and then to go, well, Beza's got this, but I think it should read this way, because I think the King James translators had that reading in it. So that's what he says there. And so let's look at, we may as well go to the King James. It just says, and John answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name. So that's the issue, in thy name. And he followeth not us, and we forbade him because he followeth not us. And so it sounds like many denominations nowadays. The disciples are really unhappy that people don't follow with their group. But Jesus was pretty cool with it. So I looked up in Erasmus's 1519, and we can see here that it has, where is it? N 2 with the iota subscript. There's a little dot and amati su. So in the name of you. So that would verify what Scrivener's saying, that N is in the older editions. But when you go to Beza's own work, this is where it gets a little bit cloudy, because you can clearly see this N here. It says N to onomati su. And so it clearly has the N here. And this is where this is where I think Scrivener's just made a mistake. So I'm just going to check down the bottom of the page here. So you have the Greek of Theodore Beza, and you have the Latin translation of Theodore Beza, and then you have the Latin Vulgate. So many times he has dots here. And so where he has per nomen tuum, we can look down the bottom, and he has 38 here, per nomen tuum, to onomati su, Erasmus ad verbum nomine tu. So he has quite a bit written on that, talking specifically about the N there. But at the end of the day, he does have it in his text. So what we have is, you can see this on the main page. I'll just go down to Mark 9:38. I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can all have a glimpse at this. I might just have to go back up and back down again. There we go. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry there, but we can all see the N with the asterisk there, meaning that's 190. The N is here. So there's no difference. And so I've actually thought earlier on that it was an omission. So I'm actually going to edit this. I'll show you how I edit. It's quite easy. Just grab the N. I've even got the Strong's number there. Actually, it's not omitted. Quite amazing. Quite remarkable. So Scrivener's made an issue about something that's not even an issue. The King James translators did follow the reading there, and they have in thy name. It doesn't say we're casting out demons thy name. Okay. We can clearly see the N here, which is here. And so this is just an error. That's the only thing that I can point to, is it's an error. And so so we don't really even have to go back to all this other source documentation. They both have N there. Okay. And Erasmus, he had N. Several other people had N. So I think it was just the earlier editions of Beza. So this is the 1565, I think it is. So let's have a look at this. He has no N here. So it has two onomati su. So it doesn't have the N here. Okay. So you can clearly see that. He's got similar footnotes down the bottom here, 38 and per nomen 2, onomati su, 2 onomati su. So you can see he's got pretty much the same footnotes, but he does change the text. So he goes with the reading of N. Okay, so in this one, it's not there, but this is an earlier edition. This is an earlier edition of Beza. Beza did 5 editions. And so it's the 1598 that Scrivener was saying that he was marking his text against. And we can see here this reading is actually in verse 31 again. Where was it? N to onomati has mu there instead of su. But it has the N. And so if you go back to Theodore Beza's 1598, that is the closest to the King James, we can see here, verse 41, it has N2 onomati mu. And you can see here N2 onomati su. So I looked up that one because I wanted to make sure that this, because it does just look like a C here. I just wanted to make sure that that actually was an N. That was my first question. So you can see here it's the same word, N2 onomati mu. And so, and I looked for that here, looking for the N. So you can see the N2 onomati su. Then you can see down here N2 onomati mu. So that is in the Textus Scrivener, but it's identical to the text of Beza. So there's no issue here whatsoever. So it's just a waste of time. And so I was even considering, should I actually just not do a video on it? But this is why I'm doing these videos, to show people that you can't always trust the scholarship of F.A.H. Scrivener, is it? Frederick Ambrose or something Scrivener. And so what else should I look at here? Okay, we'll just quickly go through these English versions. So I was looking at one thing here. So you see this in Scrivener, it's got the N here, okay? Now, when we go to Beza, it doesn't have the N. But is that true? No, it's not. Why doesn't it have it in this particular text here? Well, because I know the guy who made this website, he basically got the list, this list here, got Scrivener's text and went back and changed all of these readings back to formulate Beza's text. So he hasn't got Beza's text like this one here and gone through word for word and made sure it's all lining up. So that's why sometimes you'll see the movable nu is there or it's not there. You'll see sometimes different capitalization and things like that, and sometimes it's just outright wrong. So like in this instance, and so I guess that's an unfortunate thing. But if this is wrong here, I mean, I would say that when it comes to Beza's issues, there might be like 20 or 30 places where he might be wrong here or have the the wrong reading, and so here it has that the text of Beza doesn't have the N, but we can clearly see here it does in the 1598. So that's why this website is wrong there, and so that just needs to be amended. Is it in the Stephanus? I'm not really sure. And so that's the thing. When you start getting to this level of study, you do question everything. You go, hang on, because some people hold on to, it says it here in the Elseviers, it's got this and that, and they're holding on to this thing like it's the source document, where you've got to go back to these sources. And so I'll just quickly show you, because I don't like leaving people in the dark and having extra knowledge, so that I can go, wow, I've got the secret knowledge that no one else has or whatever. If you just go to my website, tr.org.au, you can clearly see, I've got that enlarged so we can read it all. But if you go to books, I'll make that smaller. That's just way too big. It's like 300%. If you go to books, if you go down the side here, you can pretty much look at any edition of the Textus Receptus. There's a few that aren't there, but I've got so much stuff there that you can go through and double check anything I'm saying, or just go straight to the source documentation. So that's where, if we look at, say, 1582 Beza, all we have to do is maybe go to the thumbnails and cruise down to where we think Mark is. Actually, this is an interesting document because it's been written up. So someone's actually handwritten all over this. So that would be really interesting too. Looks like it's in Greek too. Wow. Very interesting. But let's get back to what we're talking about. So I don't need that open. I don't need that open. We've looked at that. Don't need that open. The earlier editions of Beza didn't have it. The latter ones did. So there's no issue there. Might just have a look. I'll just have a look and see if this one has it. This is exactly how I would look this up. But sometimes if you go to title view, it has, you can go to Mark or you can go to Luke. And but oftentimes you're just left with going, okay, which book am I in? Flicking back and forward page by page and going, oh, I'm still in Matthew. Or okay, so we are still in Matthew. So we go just to go. I don't want to bore you guys, because I do want to show you something else on the Textus Receptus Academy. Yeah, so I won't bore you guys with going to this. Actually, maybe I should, because I'm already halfway there. So let's go. This was an interesting table. I've seen, this is the second time I've seen this, where it seems to show the days and nights of, Jesus on the 14th. He was crucified in the 15th, 16th, and 17th. And so he's got the 3 days here and the 3 nights. So he seems to point almost to a Wednesday type of thing, Wednesday evening. It's interesting. It's like, but it's interesting that he was talking about this. And this is one of the topics that I really like to talk about as well. But anyway, we are looking for Mark chapter 9. Okay, where are we? Mark 9, chapter 5. I know it's so much easier when it's got an index. Okay, so that's chapter 9 there. And we are right on it. 38? No, that's not right. That's chapter 9 there. So we would be looking at 38 maybe appearing about here. Yes, 38 goes on to the next page. And we don't have the N here. We have Tina to onomati su. So it doesn't have Tina N to onomati su. It's still, I think it still has the same type of footnote, quite a large footnote actually. That would be an interesting one to go to, but unfortunately I do not speak Latin. Okay, so it does have the concept of dia here, which means by or through. So dia to onomatos. Okay, so maybe that's in the other gospel. Maybe it says that. So an interesting thing to look at, but at the end of the day, he has N and so does Scrivener, so there's no issue. But I will look into this just out of general curiosity a bit later in my own little study. So we looked at Erasmus. We've looked at that. So the next one we're going to go through will be Mark 9:42. So I haven't really put the pictures there or anything. I've got one little picture, which is Micron Totu. So it's the Complutense and Vulgate, the AV 1611. So sometimes that's a marginal note or an earlier edition of the KJV. So Micron and the deletion, I guess, of Totun in the other edition. So we'll go through that. Yeah, here is the issue here. Okay. These in 1611 and these in italic in 1638. So that's interesting. That'll be an interesting one to go through because it looks like it happened in the lifetime of the King James Version translators. So that's it for Mark 9:38. But one thing I wanted to quickly have a look at, I really appreciate the work done here because it's very similar to the work that I'm doing. Here. So Chris Yetzer. So he has an analysis of the 60 places where the Latin Vulgate appears to have been the authority adopted by the King James translators in preference to Beza, according to FHA Scrivener, Part 3. So this is only numbers 21 to 35 out of the 60 places. So this has everything to do with what we're doing, because I'm going through mostly these Greek editions. But at the end of this appendix, he does have this list, which he, Scrivener, claims is Latin interpolations, and so readings that came from Latin texts. But when you look at it, it's like Beelzebub. Okay, well, Beelzebub was just the way that English people spoke. They called the Beelzebub Beelzebub. Now the Greek name is Beelzebul, and we might be able to see Baal in that and go, okay, well, let's relate it to Baal, But Beelzebub, yes, it is Latin, but a lot of words come from Latin. It doesn't mean that they've just gotten from the Vulgate. Now, it could be inadvertently that it's come into the culture through the Vulgate, but it doesn't mean the King James translators were sitting there with the Vulgate on one side, their word choices on the other, and went, we're going with the Vulgate. No, they went with what was popularly known to the English people in their day. And so he's going through this list, which is very good. And so I sort of find this list here is like tagged on. This was part of the 60 list. Was it the 60 list or the 59 list? That is in Appendix E, which you can look at if you go to the bottom of my page. Appendix E here. And so, some of these Greek ones, some of these are the same as the 190 list. But then we have sort of tagged on the bottom is this. And it's exactly the same list. But we see here that this was the Greek text adopted by the Bible of 1611. And so I can't remember exactly when this came out. But I'm pretty sure that, yes, I remember seeing the original of this, and it just seemed like he just copied and pasted that in the end of the book. And when you read it, when you read what he actually says here, which I'll just find again, he says the present list is probably quite incomplete, and a few cases seem precarious. It is possible that some of the readings for which the Complutensian Vulgate have been cited above were derived from the Vulgate rather than from the Complutensian. The same may be said of Collinnaeus' Vulgate in 1 Corinthians, 14:10, in 1 John 1:5. So he's just saying it's not complete. This is, here we go. I'm just throwing these out there. But again, when you go through a lot of these things, they're to do with names. So Beelzebub is a name. When you look at what was one that I just saw, Simeon, Clementine, and that's the Clementine Vulgate. Jesu Christi. So I think it's around a certain way. But I mean, really, we're going to examine all these. But I'm thankful that Christopher Yetzer is actually going through these and coming to the same conclusion that I'm coming to, that a lot of the issues that Theodore Beza's brought up, they are non-issues. So say just a random one. Let's just go to this one here, Acts 13:1. The TR has Sumeron, and the Vulgate has Simeon, and the King James Version has Simeon. So Simeon. Scrivener's perspective I'm not positive what Scrivener is trying to point out. His note reads, and then he's got it all written there. In both Acts verses as well as Revelation 7:7, the Clementine Vulgate has Simon. So Acts 13:1, Simon, Erasmus, Clementine Vulgate, the Vulgate, Simeon, Beza, Simeon, KJV, Jerome. Acts 15:14, Simeon, Clementine, Vulgate, Simeon, Beza, Erasmus, Simeon, KJV, Jerome. If Scrivener were trying to point out the difference between Simeon and Simeon, there may be an argument to be made that the King James Version doesn't exactly follow Beza's spelling. I don't think it's a grave issue to translate the Greek upsilon with an English I, but Scrivener seems to be pointing out the difference between Simeon and Simon. Beza's text has the eon ending on both passages in Acts, so it seems that Scrivener's argument is based on Erasmus reading rather than Beza's. The only thing I can determine is that possibly Scrivener's claim is that Beza changed his reading at Acts 13:1 based on the Vulgate's reading at Acts 15:14. So you can see people are perplexed of why would Scrivener put this as a part of his list. And at the end of the day, you can sort of sense the frustration of Chris Yetzer, and I have that frustration as well, because a lot of people say, oh, Scrivener's text, it's the best one. Now, he did a pretty good job, but at the end of the day, it's just Beza's text. And he's got 190 differences, but I would say about 170 of them are unnecessary. And I'm really glad that Chris Yetzer is going through this. It's just very helpful. So I'm going to go through a lot of this myself and just check this. But yeah, it's very helpful. But I wanted to point that out, that the 60 places of Latin Vulgate appears to have been the authority adopted by the KJV translators in preference to Beza. So it's quite interesting that some of these people, he was instrumental in the formulation of the Westcott and Hort text, working with Unitarians to bring that text about. But because he's made a TR edition, well, he's Mr. Textus Receptus now. Really, if he hadn't made this TR edition, if he hadn't been commissioned by Ellicott and the Westcott and Hort Translation Committee to do this, he would probably be seen as like another Westcott and Hort, because he was deeply compromised and he wanted to omit so many verses away from the King James. And so there are a few places where maybe the woman caught in adultery and the last 12 verses of Mark where he's sort of agreeing with Burgon. But at the end of the day, they're huge chunks. If you read Scrivener's books, he got more and more liberal as time went along. In his earlier books, he has lists of verses that he wants to delete. And there's only a few. There's like 20 or 30. And then as you go into his older books, it gets up to 45 complete verses, verses he's just throwing it under the bus. And so, like, to me, it's a bit like getting someone who is very educated on the King James and the King James issues, but isn't really for the King James, that they want to change it. So it's a bit like getting someone like it's hard to say who would be like that in this generation, because most people do turn against the King James and really rail on it. But there are some people who have an affiliation with the King James. I guess like people like Timothy Berg. He's sort of like infatuated with the King James and he studies that whole issue all the time. It's like having him do an edition. Yeah, like just because you know about it and you know some arguments about it doesn't mean that you're an expert on it. And so this is one of the things with Scrivener. A lot of people point to him and say he's the go-to guru for a lot of this material. But I've found a lot of his issues, they're wanting. A lot of his conclusions are not solid. When you examine them and you just read through the text like we did today, it's like, well, he clearly has misread the N there when it does have it. So But perhaps he is pointing to a footnote, and that's what Chris Yates said here. But at the end of the day, if he's coming to the same conclusion, it doesn't matter what the footnote says. So that's where I guess we've got to, decipher exactly what he's saying. But at the end of the day, like I said, there's probably about 170 unnecessary changes that he made from Theodore Beza's text to the Textus Receptus. Now, there are about 20 that were translatable differences. And so this is why people conclude that the King James translators formulated their own Greek text, their own Textus Receptus. Now, had they done a parallel Bible, we'd all be happy little Vegemites. We'd all be getting along and, singing Kumbaya around a fire right now with Mark Ward and all the rest of them. But unfortunately, they didn't do a Greek parallel Bible. What they did was they just did an English Bible. And so the source text, the Greek that underlies their Bible, although it's only 20 places, it is enough to say, okay, that's a different edition of the TR. And that's why people go, well, it's only in the King James, it's in the English. And that's why even Scrivener and the Westcott and Hort guys, Ellicott and all that, they recognize this. That's why they commissioned Scrivener to find those places. But he came up with a whole lot more that was quite unnecessary. Are these really a huge issue? Well, I'm into the jots and tittles. And so I know for some people, this is a huge faith issue because they're like, well, the Greek, and, a lot of people who are, sort of tied at the hip to the Westminster Confession of Faith, and it's only in the original languages, and they're immediately inspired. And then other things, they can be inspired, but not in the same sort of way. Well, I mean, Scrivener was, I understand the whole concept of back translation that James White talks about is completely wrong, but there is an element of where there is a difference between Theodore Beza's text and the King James. That's what Scrivener was focusing on. So it's only in those places where he sort of back translated, you know what I mean? So he is just looking for changes and going, oh, hang on, maybe there's a change there. So he's going back through all the Greek texts and all the rest of it, but he's making errors. That's one of the main points we want to show. And, people are like, well, which Greek text do I go to then? Well, I would just go back to Theodore Beza's, and where there are differences between Theodore Beza's and the King James text, which is pretty much shown in Scrivener's text anyway. If you stick with me and go through this 190 list, at the end we'll have a definitive list of all the places where we can go, okay, let's just tidy up Scrivener's text, and let's just we got Beza's text and we got Scrivener's text, and then let's just tidy it all up. Now we've got a perfect Greek text to go with. But at the moment, it's not a perfect Greek text. I mean, everyone already knows that anyway, because Scrivener doesn't have an amen at the end of at the end of Ephesians. And so that just shows that, your King James that you hold in your hand does have an amen there. And it should be there. It's in the text of Theodore Beza. And so it should be there. And so, but Scrivener omits that because the 1611 had a print error and didn't have it there. So there's things like that where sometimes he's following print errors, sometimes he's making mistakes. I found a mistake recently, and maybe I can show it to you. But it was just a hyphen. It was a breathing mark, and he couldn't see it because it was in the line, in the marginal line. And so, but I don't want to waste you guys' time, just me just surfing around looking on my website. But there was, and I should be able to recognize this straight away as soon as I see it. Actually, it's way down. I think it is this one. Yeah, it's something like this, where you have a breathing mark, but it's actually in the line. And so he's replaced it but it didn't need replacing. Just like the one that I've just shown you with the N, it's in Beezer, it's in Scrivener, there's no difference. But he said there's a difference. So it's just a mistake. So there you go. So, some people, like, I understand that some people, they can have their faith shaken by this type of thing. I'm not doing this purposely to go, well, we're undermining the Textus Receptus or whatever. I run the Textus Receptus website. I'm all for the TR. But at the end of the day, I want people to go to what is accurate. The text of Beezer is pretty much the text the King James guys used. There's about 20 differences between the King James text and Beezer's text. So that proves that the King James translators made different choices in a few places here and there, but they never printed their Greek text, or a Scrivener 250 years later would never have done what he did. They just would have reprinted the one that was underlying, but they didn't just reprint Beezer. And so where do you go to for the Greek text? Well, it's quite easy to figure out what was written there. It's not hard to go, okay, well, the English is saying that. So that's why people go, oh, the King James is the final authority. Well, the thing is, if you have someone like Theodore Beezer was an amazing linguist. He was an amazing person. He knew many different languages. He knew Latin, he knew Greek. He was contemporary with Tremellius and Janius, and did amazing Latin Bible, French Bible, Geneva Bible, French Geneva and English Geneva. He was part with both of those. But when you look at someone like Lancelot Andrews, he outshines Beezer. So some of the King James translators, well, I think any one of the King James translators could have brought out their own Greek text, and it would have been seen as authoritative for the translation of the King James. And so when people go, oh, well, it's like you're sort of just getting a translation and then you're back translating, this is Ruckmanism and all this other rubbish. It's like, no, actually, Theodore Beezer did a really, really good job. 99.9999% of his text was used by the King James translators. They took their hat off to Beezer and said, Beezer, you've done a great job. There's just a few little bits. There's a hair in there, and there's a tiny little bit here that we just want to amend. And here we go. We're just going to do an English version of that. And so years later, people are like, okay, what's the definitive text? And a lot of people, even in the London Polyglot, were going back to the text of Stephanus, and people going to the Elzevers, and some people were still going back to Beezer. But at the end of the day, even people who didn't like the King James, they wanted to amend it and everything like that, like Scrivener and Westcott and Horton, the rest of it, they recognized the underlying Greek text of the King James is the authority and the final edition of the TR. That's why Scrivener did what he did. So even they agree with what I'm saying. So it's not kooky. A lot of people are like, oh, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. And it's like, well, okay, well, the TR that you hold in your hand is a part of that process, or else Scrivener wouldn't have had to do what he did. Because a lot of people are holding up the Scrivener text going, this is exactly the words of God. And it's like, okay, yeah, I agree to the 99.999%, but there's just a few little bits here and there. And that's why we're going through this, not to cut against anyone's faith, but to actually increase your faith, to trust in the Reformation text. And specifically, like Edward Hill said, the King James itself is its own edition of the TR. When you understand that, the TR and the King James are basically akin. The King James is the final edition of all those Reformation English Bibles. It's the one principal good one out of many good ones, but it is also the final choices of the Textus Receptuses that were printed from the Complutensian through Erasmus, through many others, all the way through to Theodore Beezer. They finalized that text as well. And it is also deeply influenced by all other languages of that era. So the Dutch, the German, the French, many other languages were looked at. And so if you read the dedication to King James in the King James Bible, it says those three things. It clearly says that they went to the English, they went to the originals, and they went to foreign language versions. So the King James isn't just a translation. It's not just a translation of a Greek text. It's a culmination of absolutely everything. Now, they went to the Greek as their authority. They went to the Hebrew as their final authority, and the Greek is their final authority. But at the end of the day, they did formulate their own Greek text. They had the scholarly ability to do that. They were fluent in Greek. They were fluent in Latin, many other languages. And so I personally look at these guys and say, I can't think of anyone else I would want to be working on my text. If these guys had done a Greek text, if they were all German-speaking people and did all this stuff in German, I would go, well, that's the text. These guys knew what they were doing. But thankfully, they've done it in English, and I can speak it and I can read it, and that's just a bonus, you know. So anyway, I think you guys get the drift about what I'm saying with Scrivener here. So let's shut this down. Thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next few days.